My name is Anna Miller. I am 26 years old, and for most of my life I believed one simple thing. My stepmother ruined my family. If you asked me about her a few years ago, I would not say anything kind. In fact, I would probably tell you that she was the coldest and most selfish woman I had ever met. I would say she stole my father from me. I would say she came into our house like a stranger and slowly changed everything that once felt warm and safe. At least, that was the story I told everyone. But before I talk about her, I should tell you a little about myself and my family. I grew up in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. Our house was not big, but it always felt full of love when I was a child. My father worked at a local construction company. He was a quiet man with strong hands and a tired smile, but he loved me more than anything in the world. My mother was very different from him. She was soft, warm, and always laughing. She loved cooking, gardening, and telling long stories at the dinner table. When I was a little girl, I thought my mother was the most wonderful person in the world. For many years, life felt simple and happy. Then, everything changed. I was 12 years old when my mother became sick. At first, it seemed like a small illness, something that would pass in a few days. But it did not pass. The doctors said many difficult words that I did not understand. My father began coming home later and later from the hospital, looking more tired every day. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch and held my hand. "Anna," he said softly, "your mother is very sick." I remember that moment clearly. I remember the sound of the clock on the wall. I remember the smell of tea in the room. But most of all, I remember the fear that suddenly filled my chest. A few months later, my mother died. After that day, the house felt empty. My father tried his best to take care of me, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. He spoke less, smiled less, and spent many quiet evenings staring at old photographs. For 3 years, it was just the two of us. And then, one day, he told me something that changed everything again. I was 15 when he sat me down at the kitchen table and cleared his throat nervously. "Anna," he said, "there is someone I want you to meet." I looked up from my book and frowned. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment. "Her name is Laura," he said. "We have been seeing each other for a few months." The words hit me like cold water. Seeing each other? I felt my face grow hot. "You mean you have a girlfriend?" I asked. My father nodded slowly. "Yes." I remember the anger that rose inside me at that moment. It felt sudden and powerful, like a storm. "How could you?" I said. My father looked confused. "Anna, You already forgot Mom?" I interrupted. His face fell immediately. "That's not true," he said quietly, but I did not want to hear his explanation. In my mind, there was only one truth. No one could ever replace my mother. Not now. Not ever. A week later, I met Laura for the first time. She came to our house one Sunday afternoon. I remember opening the door and seeing her standing there with a small, nervous smile. She looked younger than I expected. She had soft brown hair and kind eyes. She was holding a small box of homemade cookies. "Hello, Anna," she said gently. "It's nice to meet you." I did not smile. I did not say hello. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my room without another word. That was the beginning of our relationship. Or maybe I should say the beginning of our war. Laura tried many times to be friendly. She would bring food, ask about school, or try to start small conversations with me. But I refused every attempt. If she asked how my day was, I answered with one word. If she tried to cook dinner, I complained about the taste. If she tried to help me with something, I told her I didn't need her. In my heart, I had already decided who she was. She was the woman who came to replace my mother. And I hated her for it. 2 years later, my father married her. I remember the day clearly. It was a small ceremony at the town hall. Only a few relatives and friends were there. I wore a simple dress and stood quietly beside my father, feeling like a stranger at my own family event. Everyone smiled and congratulated them, but inside, I felt nothing but anger. When the ceremony ended, Laura walked toward me with hopeful eyes. "Anna," she said softly, "I know this is difficult for you, but I really want us to become a family." I laughed coldly. "You are not my family," I said. Her face changed instantly. The hope in her eyes disappeared, replaced by silent pain. But I did not care. At least, that is what I told myself. Life after their marriage became tense and uncomfortable. Laura moved into our house, and suddenly everything felt different. She organized the kitchen, cleaned the living room, and tried to create new routines. To me, it felt like she was erasing my mother's memory. Sometimes she would ask simple things like, "Anna, did you finish your homework?" Or, "Would you like some tea?" But I always answered with sharp words. "Stop acting like my mother," I would say. Or sometimes I would simply ignore her completely. My father noticed the tension, of course. Many evenings, he tried to talk to me about it. "Anna," he would say, "Laura is trying her best. Please be kinder to her." But I refused. "No," I said. "She doesn't belong here." Over time, my anger only grew stronger. I told my friends that my stepmother was cold and selfish. I told them she pretended to be kind, but was secretly controlling our lives. I complained about every little thing she did. In my version of the story, Laura was the villain, and I was the daughter protecting my mother's memory. Years passed like this. I left school, started working, and continued living in the same house with them. But the distance between Laura and me never disappeared. If anything, it became deeper. Looking back now, I realized something strange. During all those years, Laura never shouted at me. She never insulted me. She never fought back. No matter how rude I was, she remained calm. But at that time, I did not see her patience. I only saw what I wanted to see. And in my mind, she would always be the woman who stole my father and destroyed our happy family. At least, that was what I believed then. What I did not know was that one day a single event would completely change the way I saw her. And when that day came, the truth about my stepmother would shock me more than anything in my life. For many years, nothing changed between Laura and me. We lived in the same house, but it never felt like a real home. At least not to me. I treated Laura like a stranger who had no right to be there. I spoke to her only when necessary, and even then, my words were cold and short. She continued trying, but I continued pushing her away. Sometimes she would make my favorite soup for dinner. She remembered that my mother used to cook it for me when I was young. But when I saw it on the table, I would roll my eyes and say, "You don't have to pretend to know what I like." She would quietly nod and say nothing. Other times, she would ask simple questions about my day. "How was work today, Anna?" "Fine," I would answer, without looking at her. "Did something interesting happen?" "No." The conversation always ended there. My father noticed everything. I could see the worry in his eyes every time we sat at the dinner table together. Sometimes he tried to make jokes or change the subject, but the tension was always there, sitting silently between us. One evening, after dinner, he asked me to stay in the living room. "Anna," he said gently, "we need to talk." I already knew what he wanted to say. "If this is about Laura, I don't want to hear it," I said. My father sighed deeply. "She cares about you," he said. "That's not true," I replied quickly. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I can see it," I said. "She just wants to control everything." My father looked at me quietly for a moment. "Anna," he said softly, "sometimes we only see what we want to see." I stood up from the chair. "Well, I don't want to see her at all," I said, and walked to my room. At that time, I believed I was right, but life has a strange way of showing us the truth when we least expect it. A few months later, something happened that began to change everything. It was a rainy afternoon. I had finished work early that day and returned home before my father. The house was quiet. Laura was not in the living room or the kitchen. I thought she might be in the garden, so I went upstairs to my room. As I walked past my father's study, I noticed the door was slightly open. The light inside the room was on. I normally never entered that room. It was my father's private space, filled with old books, papers, and family photographs. But that day, something caught my attention. Laura was inside. She was sitting at the desk with several papers in front of her. Her head was slightly down, and she looked very serious. For a moment, I just stood there, watching through the open door. Then I pushed the door open. "What are you doing?" I asked sharply. Laura looked up quickly, clearly surprised to see me. "Oh, Anna," she said, "you're home early." "That doesn't answer my question," I said. "Why are you in my father's study?" She hesitated for a moment. "I was organizing some papers," she said calmly. I walked closer and looked at the documents on the desk. They were medical papers, hospital reports, doctor's letters. My heart skipped for a moment. "Why do you have these?" I asked. Laura looked at me quietly. "They are your father's medical records," she said. The room suddenly felt very cold. "My father is healthy," I said quickly. Laura did not answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow breath and folded her hands together. "Anna," she said softly, "your father didn't want to worry you." A strange feeling began growing in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Laura's voice remained gentle. "Your father has been seeing doctors for several months." My mind refused to accept the words. "That's not true," I said. "He is fine." She shook her head slowly. "He didn't want you to know until he was sure." The papers on the desk suddenly felt heavy with meaning. "What kind of illness?" I asked quietly. Laura looked at the floor before answering. "His heart," she said. The words hit me like a storm. "My father? Sick?" For a moment I could not speak. All those evenings when he looked tired, all those quiet moments when he seemed distracted. I had never asked why. I had been too busy being angry. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. Laura looked at me with sad eyes. "Because he knows how much you have already lost," she said. The room became silent. Then I noticed something else. On the desk was a notebook. I recognized my father's handwriting on the cover. "What is that?" I asked. Laura looked at the notebook and then back at me. "It's something he has been writing," she said. "Writing what?" She hesitated again. "Letters," she said quietly. "Letters for you." My heart began beating faster. For me. Laura nodded. In case something happens to him. The air felt difficult to breathe. Slowly, I picked up the notebook and opened it. Inside were pages filled with my father's handwriting. The first letter began with simple words. Dear Anna, if you are reading this, it means I did not have enough time to say everything I wanted. My vision became blurry. I quickly closed the notebook. I can't read this, I said. Laura stood up slowly. You don't have to read it now, she said, but you should know something. I looked at her, confused. What? She walked closer to me, her voice calm but serious. Your father asked me to help him take care of you, she said. I frowned. What do you mean? Before we married, she continued, he told me he was worried about the future. Why? I asked. Because he knew he might not always be here. My mind struggled to understand. You're saying he married you because of me? Laura shook her head gently. No, she said. We married because we loved each other. But he also wanted someone he trusted to be there for you. I stared at her, unable to speak. For years, I had believed she entered our lives to replace my mother. But now another possibility appeared in front of me. A possibility I had never considered before. Laura looked at me quietly. I know you think I am a bad person, she said, but Anna, I never tried to replace your mother. Her voice was soft but honest. I only tried to protect the family your father loved. I felt something inside my chest begin to crack. For the first time in many years, I was not completely sure that my story about Laura was true. And that realization scared me more than anything else. That evening, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Laura's words, the notebook, and my father's letters. For years, I had painted her as the villain in my life, blaming her for everything that went wrong. But now, I was forced to question everything I believed. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen quietly. Laura was already there, making breakfast. The smell of toast and eggs filled the room. Normally, I would have walked past her without a word, but this time I stopped. My stomach tightened, my heart racing, as I realized that for the first time, I was seeing her differently. Good morning, she said softly, glancing at me. I froze. The words felt strange coming from me. Good morning, I said back, almost whispering. She smiled, a small, gentle smile, and continued preparing breakfast. I didn't know how to start, so I simply stood there, watching. After a few minutes, she turned and placed a plate in front of me. Eggs the way you like them, she said. I stared at the plate for a moment. My first instinct was to complain, as I always did. But something stopped me. Instead of criticizing, I nodded. Thank you, I said quietly. She looked at me, surprised, and then returned to her cooking. That small acknowledgement felt like the first step in a very long journey. Later that day, I found the courage to sit with her in the living room. I held the notebook and the letters from my father in my hands. I read some of these letters, I began, my voice trembling. He trusted you to take care of me. He trusted you. Laura sat beside me, calm and patient. Yes, she said softly. He wanted someone who loved you to be here. Not someone who would replace your mother, but someone who would protect your family. I felt my chest tighten. For the first time in years, I realized that everything I had blamed on her might have been my own anger and grief. I had been so focused on keeping my mother's memory alive that I refused to accept anyone else into our lives. I'm sorry, I whispered, barely able to say it. Laura looked at me, her eyes full of warmth. "Anna, it's okay. I understand. You were hurting. You still are. But it's never too late to start again." Her words struck me. Never too late. Could it really be that simple? Could I finally let go of my anger and see the truth? That afternoon, we sat together and began talking for the first time in years. I told her about my childhood, my memories of my mother, and how angry I had been when she came into our lives. She listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging, and when it was her turn, she shared her story. Laura had never wanted to replace my mother. She loved my father, yes, but she also cared for me from the very beginning. Every kind gesture, every attempt to connect, had been her way of reaching out to me. Every time I had been rude or dismissive, she had chosen patience. She had never once given up on me. Tears filled my eyes as I listened. For years I had carried a story of hate and blame, and now, for the first time, I realized it was a story I had created for myself, a story that was not real. Over the next few weeks, our relationship began to change. I still made mistakes, still reacted with old habits sometimes, but slowly, I learned to see Laura as a person, not just as the stepmother I had always resented. She was kind, patient, and strong in ways I had never appreciated before. One evening, my father came home early from work. He looked tired, but when he saw us sitting together, talking and laughing quietly, his face softened. "I've been waiting for this," he said softly, his voice full of relief. I smiled at him, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Me too," I said quietly. From that moment, our house began to feel like a home again. Not the same home it had been with my mother, because that would never come back. But a home where love could exist in a new way, where forgiveness could grow, and where I could finally understand that families come in different forms. Looking back now, I realize that anger and resentment can blind us from seeing the truth. For years, I had refused to acknowledge Laura's love because I was too focused on what I thought I had lost. But love does not always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes quietly, patiently, waiting for us to open our hearts. One afternoon, as I sat with Laura in the garden, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. We talked about small things, silly things, and I laughed in a way that I hadn't laughed since I was a child. "Anna," Laura said, "I'm proud of you for seeing the truth." I looked at her and smiled. "I'm proud of you for never giving up on me." That evening, I knew my life had changed. I had learned a lesson about patience, understanding, and forgiveness. I had learned that it was possible to love someone I had once hated. And I knew, deep down, that my father had been right to trust her all along. Sometimes, the hardest people to love are the ones who are trying the hardest to reach us. And sometimes, we are too blind to see it until we open our hearts and minds. Now, our family is not perfect. We have our disagreements and small arguments, just like any other family. But there is love and respect and understanding. And that, I have learned, is what truly makes a home. If you enjoyed my story and want to improve your English listening skills while hearing more emotional, relatable stories like mine, I invite you to visit my YouTube channel, Listen and Learn English. On my channel, you will find emotional storytelling in simple English, perfect for A1 to A2 learners, step-by-step listening practice to improve comprehension, vocabulary tips and easy-to-understand moral lessons, stories that teach life lessons while helping you practice English, Click, listen, and learn with me. Every story is an opportunity to improve your English and experience the world through someone else's eyes. Don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community of learners who love stories and English just as much as you do. Join now and let's listen and learn English together.